Hello, and welcome to the Pillar Diaries, episode number 23, featuring Sister Stephanie Edmond. Sister Stephanie attends Calvary Tabernacle in Indianapolis, Indiana, pastored by Brother and Sister Carson. She was born in Texas, but has lived all over the country due to her father's career in the military. In 2006, Sister Stephanie experienced the pain of losing her mother at the age of 16. Stephanie visited her very first Apostolic church in 2011 while in college in Mississippi. This is where she was baptized in Jesus' name and received the gift of the Holy Ghost. She's involved in the deaf ministry, serves in the orchestra team, the special events team, the baptismal team, and the church cleaning ministry team. Stephanie is a program manager at Noble of Indiana, where she helps support special needs adults. Stephanie states that God would take her on a journey of finding out who He meant for her to be. Through the pain, tears, hurt, and loss, she would learn that God can make something beautiful out of something very dark. As this pillar tells of her darkest moments, pay attention to the pain that was never noticed. As she walked in and out of the church and even participated in ministry, she was facing some of the hardest struggles of her entire life. We never know what's hiding behind somebody else's smile, even the person serving and sitting right next to you in the church. Listen to this pillar as she takes you on a journey of pain, grief, restoration, and finding her purpose. These women are our pillars, and their stories are our monuments. If we ever fail to tell their stories, what they have built will crumble. These are their diaries.
My name is Stephanie Edmond, and I am from Indianapolis, Indiana, but I did not grow up there whatsoever. I was born in Killeen, Texas, on Fort Hood Army Base. My dad is Army retired, so I grew up in the Army as an Army brat. So I kind of lived in Alaska, Kansas. I ended up in Mobile, Alabama, actually Theodore, but most people don't know where that is. It's a small town that doesn't exist unless you know where it is. But Mobile is where I spent most of my childhood and teenage life. Then I ended up going to college in Mississippi. And then I ended up in 2014 moving to Indianapolis. God had called me into a whole different ballgame realm of ministry. And so I ended up in Indianapolis, and I now go to Calvary Tabernacle, which is under the direction of Pastor Josh Carson. And so that's kind of my childhood of where I grew up and stuff. My story really does begin when I was in high school. So at the age of 16, I lost my mom tragically. On April 8th of 2006, she went in the hospital. We really don't know what. Her liver and kidneys were swollen. And then within 1 month exactly to the date, May 8th of 2006, she ended up passing away. There was nothing the doctors could do. They had done everything. She was in a coma and stuff. And so, I was young, 16. And so from seeing 16, that kind of rapidly changed my entire dynamic of my life. I was the youngest. I have an older sister. She was already out of the house. We're 4 years apart. But my dad, I always say that I kind of lost my dad mentally. He was just in love with my mom. My mom and dad knew each other for 1 month before they got married. And they were married for, I think, 22 years. And so losing my mom was just as hard on him as it was the rest of the family. So I kind of picked up the chores, the grocery shopping. I kind of always say I lost my teenage life and became an adult really young. And so that right there, I didn't know how to grieve. I was told, be strong for your dad and things like that. And so the grieving process never happened for me at a young age. And so I always say I held my emotions in a box. I picked up private lessons. So I did 3 private lessons for instruments, and I worked a part-time job, and I went in school and was involved in 5 or 6 clubs in high school. So I was constantly busy but that right there shaped me into the woman I would become years later and had no idea. So my box, any emotion that would hit me, I would just shove in a box, forget about it, and move on with life, never grieving. And that box just became tighter and tighter with emotions in it. And so, and then fast forward a few years later, I ended up going to college in Mississippi, which in Wiggins, Mississippi, which you probably don't know where that is either, so don't look it up. It's a small town. It's literally just the college. And I met my first apostolic lady, I guess. We were young adults at the time. She was apostolic, and I just was kind of in church and stuff, and she took me to my first church service, and I was struggling. My dad was getting remarried. I've been the only woman in the house for so many years, and so if you're a woman, you very well know that you also are very territorial of things, and that house had become mine and stuff, and so she was coming in. So I was struggling with a lot of stuff, but this lady who was in band with me took me to my first apostolic service. And I remember being in the altar and just like, oh my goodness, never felt this presence of God before ever. And so she took me to her church, and I finally, I was baptized on May 8th of 2011, which was Mother's Day at the time, and was also the day a few years later that my mom had passed, that kind of anniversary, and I wanted to change that anniversary. So I'm first generation apostolic in my family. And so, but that kind of led up to that point. So after I got baptized, I had been refilled, but if you want to take a moment, let's go back to my first actual service. So it was a revival. It was I don't know what they call it. I still don't know all the lingo and things like that with the apostolic faith. That's a whole nother ball game. If you're new to apostolic, get used to the lingo. But you have it was the young adults and high school retreat or whatever. It was a service that there was one apostolic church near this college, which was random because there's 2 churches in the entire little area, and one happened to be apostolic, which was funny. And so she took me to the service, and I remember walking in, and the first comment I'll never forget, and she doesn't let me live it down, that the first comment I made was, man, everybody has their hair up in a bun. What is this? I didn't know anything about apostolic at the time. And so the bun really threw me off, because I'd been to church services, but they're all really short hair. And so the long hair really threw me off. But I remember and there was another lady that was from her church. Her church had come up. They were on the Gulf Coast in Biloxi, Mississippi. And so it was probably about a 3-hour drive up to kind of North Mississippi. And so I remember walking in, and it was the friendliest church I had ever been in. Everybody was so welcoming, and I didn't look the part. I did not look apostolic. I did not, I had a skirt on and stuff because I knew she wore them, so I was let me be respectful. I'm gonna put a skirt on. But my hair was a boy cut, it was up to here. Okay, so I had short hair, and so I remember walking in and sitting down and the worship service, and here goes somebody running, and they're dancing, and they're moving, and I'm this is pretty nice. I can do this. I can do this whole thing. Because I never liked boring church services at all. And so if you're apostolic, you're not, I don't think you have dead church ever. That's just not normal in the apostolic faith, I believe. And so, but then he got up and preached, and I don't know what he preached. I cannot tell you for the life of me, but what I can remember is when he called to the altar. I remember walking down and feeling the presence of God just sweep over you. And I never felt that. I'd gone to church, I'd, been in the church of God and things like that, but I had never felt his full presence. It was kind of like a blanket just wrapped around me and was I have you. You're okay and you're safe. And I remember staying in the altar, and I remember speaking in tongues in the altar for the first time there. Again, not baptized yet, but speaking, and the lady that came from her church, the friend from college's lady from her church, she came over, and I remember her praying with me, and she didn't know me. She had no idea who I was. She never met me a day in my life before that moment, but just sat there and just prayed. And I think we sat in the altar until the church closed pretty much, because I didn't want to leave the presence of God. We just prayed and we prayed, and I remember just I hadn't cried that much in so long, and so my eyes were wet. I was a hot mess. It was kind of one of those church services where the good church service, you find the bobby pins on the floor. That's what it was. That was that kind of church service. And so, but then that's when I was I have to go to your church. And so I walked through that process of going through her church and seeing the different dynamics and learning about the oneness of God and learning about, God is really there, and like you can talk to him. Like it's like you just picking up a phone and being like, hey, I just need to talk to you, and so it was very special to me. And then when I got baptized, I remember, going in the water, and you can't ever take my experience away from me, because I went down in the water, and when I came up, I remember speaking in other tongues as they brought me up out of the water, and like they had to help me get out because I didn't want to get out of the baptismal tank. I was one of those that like just wanted to sit in the baptismal tank and like not move. And so, but I was just so in prayer that they took me to the back, and like ladies came back, and we were in the back just praying, and from there it was just history, because I was like, that's it, this is great and stuff. And so of course Bible studies and all of that happened. And then years later, so it was like 2011 to 2014, I ended up really feeling a call to be part of like the deaf ministry, which is why I talk with my hands a lot. And so I ended up moving to Indianapolis, and that's kind of how I was brought to Indianapolis. I'm Southern, even though I was an Army brat. I was born in the South, raised mostly in the South, so the cold, took me forever. People know that I'm from the South in the winter. I stay cold and I'm bundled completely. I actually have a picture that is of me and Missy, one of my close friends who you'll hear a little bit later about. We have a picture together, and we're like bundled completely up and stuff. Well, I'm bundled and she's not. She's from like way north of Wisconsin or something, or Pennsylvania, I think. And so she's just chilling out in a jacket, and there's snow all around. Here I am like bundled complete. It's really funny to look at, but that's a whole other ball game too. So, but that's how I ended up in Indianapolis. So if we fast forward like a couple of years, I had gone through works and things like that, and I had gone through some of my own personal traumas during Indianapolis. Like I was far away from home, and I didn't have family and things like that. Like that's hard for a single person to go through when they don't have family. You don't have a husband, you don't have kids, and there's absolutely not one blood-related family in Indianapolis or in Indiana for me when I arrived. And so that was a struggle. But then if we fast forward a little bit, 2020 hit, and 2020 was probably hard on everybody. If it wasn't, then I'd like to meet you, because I don't know if I've met somebody who it just didn't struggle with somebody or something. You've gone through your own struggles. But during 2020, I ended up going to see a therapist for the first time. And in that point, I realized how much trauma and pain that I was going through. My anxiety had skyrocketed, where it was like, and if you don't have anxiety, bless you for not having it. But anxiety for me was a constant move. And that, if you remember from the beginning of my story, when I was 16, I picked up on everything. Like I had 5 clubs, the jobs, the lessons. That anxiety is my form of anxiety, where I get so like I think they call it like high functioning anxiety. And I have to constantly go and constantly move and keep my brain from never stopping and sitting, because I didn't want to feel the grief and the pain. But my box from when I was 16 had become so packed and so full of hurts and pains that it was starting to crack and crumble. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to try therapy. So I went and saw, Felicia Miller was my first therapist. And when I went to see her, we worked on things and we processed. And then 2020 it was hard in general for everybody. But if we go another year, and in 2021, work was horrible. My life was just like chaotic. I wasn't able to balance anything. I had, lost, part of jobs, and like my job changed, and we lost so many staff at my work. I'm a program manager for special needs. And so like I couldn't bring back all my special needs. So it was just really a struggle again, like for everybody. And I didn't know, what to do. And so on June 8th of 2021, I had planned my suicide attempt. And that day really shook the core to my body. But before June 8th, that Saturday, so June 8th was a Tuesday in 2021. So that Saturday, I had woken up, and if you have never had depression, again, bless you. But my depression is, I have 2 cats, okay? And like I buy the 50-pound bag of cat litter at Sam's because it's cheaper. And so but 50 pounds is heavy no matter what that 50 pounds is. And so it was like I carried a 50-pound bag of cat litter with me everywhere I went. It just stayed on me. And it didn't matter if I was sitting or anything. It was just as if like it stayed on my shoulders and it was 50 pounds. And that was horrible. Like if you ever carry it, that's what my weight felt like. And so I had woken up and it was hard to even get out of bed, but I knew I had places to go. I had cats to feed, had things to do. I needed to get up. And I thought, okay, if I can just get up. So I got up and I got my stuff done. And then I went on a walk with a friend. And Missy was the one that I went on a walk with. And we went on a walk and we talked about some different things. And so after the walk, what we did was we separated and I went in my car and I just sat. And I knew if I went home, the voices was there. The depression was there. The negative voices were in the house and stuff. And I didn't have anybody in the house with my cats. And I thought, okay, if I go home, what's going to happen? And instead of reaching out to anybody, I thought, okay, I'm just going to drive around town. It's still like in the evening-ish, and I'm going to go drive around town. And so I did that for a few hours. Finally went home. I had to go home eventually. And when I walked in, I could feel just the weight even heavier than before. And I climbed those stairs, and I couldn't do it anymore. I could not make it. And so I knew I had sleeping pills that I took. And I knew if I could just take them and knock out, everything would be okay. I wasn't at the point of like, let's kill myself today. But it was like, if I could just knock out, what would I do? So I took 2, and you're not supposed to. And I took 2. And I don't remember. I remember kind of being like woozy and like kind of just neurotic. But I remember waking up the next morning on the couch. I have no idea from the time I took them to the couch exactly what happened. I don't know. It was as if like it was just a black slate. And I got up and I knew I had to go to church. I was an interpreter. I had to interpret for the deaf. I needed to go to church. And so as I went on in, it took forever to even walk down the sanctuary, because when you're in the church and even if you're first generation, there's so many apostolics who we think we have to be this perfect little person and like everything's put together, but we're not. We're human. We have flesh and we have baggage and stuff. And being a first generation, I had baggage way before church that I didn't even realize I had. I never grieved my mom's death, really. And so when I walked down, I finally made it. And I will never forget that Sunday morning service. Pastor preached on the helmet of salvation. And that service has always stood out. But the problem I had was I had my priorities so mixed up that I was the only one in the church sitting there, and like, nobody's ever felt this, ever. Nobody knows what you feel like. You just need to pray more, read your Bible more. And I did that, and I done that, and I'd gone to the altar. And so at the end of his message, he asked, anybody who needs prayer for their mind, come to the altar and let us pray for you. And I was serving in some ministries, the deaf ministry, along with another ministry during that time. And I felt so compelled that I had to serve, because they're not who wants somebody like me in the church? Like, if I let them know what I did and what I planned, like, who is going to want me in the church is what I thought. And so I did not go down. I continued on the ministry. And I remember even an older lady looking at me going, "Are you okay? Something's off." And I said, "Oh, I'm fine. I pushed it off, And then, so fast forward 2 days, on Tuesday I woke up, and again, I'm a program manager, and we were short staffed. So I'm also my staff and also the program manager at the same time. And so that was just really hard balancing. And there were so many problems, so many staff quitting. And we just were like left and right over problem after problem. And like that right there at work can just cause problems in your life when there's so much problems at work, and I could just feel everything, and anything I did was wrong. And so I was done. At the end of the day, I was done. I could no longer feel, I could no longer I was done. I didn't want to live. And so I had decided that when I would go home, I knew there was exactly 15 sleeping pills left in my bottle. And I had planned to take all 15. And I was done. I didn't want to live anymore. I didn't care. And so I wrote a note. And when I walked in, I knew that was it. I started my suicide plan. Got the house ready, fed the cats, wrote the note, left my phone out, put the code of my phone next to it, and laid on the couch with my cats for a little bit. And my therapist, who I had reached out earlier and told her thank you for everything, but I'm done. And her being an apostolic therapist in the first place, she instantly reached out and said, you need to come to my office. And I really was contemplating. I didn't answer her right away. And I was like, no, I don't want to go to your office. I would rather die today than go to your office. And I didn't answer her right away. And then I emailed her back and I said, no, you're busy. I'm fine, and she texted and she's like, no, I have an appointment that canceled. You need to come to the office. And again, she's apostolic. And what I didn't know until weeks later, that she had heard from God to tell me to get to the office, and when I arrived, not to let her go. And so, because if I had gone back, if I had stayed home, I would not be sitting here today in this chair whatsoever. So I somehow, and I don't know why, only thing I can say is it was 100% God. It was not me. It wasn't Felicia. It was 100% God, because I would not have gone at all because I didn't want to go. I dragged myself into the office and I literally argued with Felicia. And she had given me options. She said, you're not leaving my office unless you either go to a friend's house or you go to the hospital. And I had told her, no, I'm going home. I'm doing what I want to do. I'm fine. I'm not suicidal. And I even looked at her and Felicia, if you don't know Felicia, she is like a little spunk to her and she cracks me up. But I literally looked at her and I said, well, why don't you test me? Why don't you, do the diagnosis thing you do? And she had a paper over here. And again, she's a little spunky. And she just grabbed, she goes, okay, I'll do this then. And so we didn't. And that's what she's like, see, you're suicidal. Let's go. And I wouldn't go to a friend's house though, because again, it's that worthlessness. It's that you are alone. No one knows how you feel. You're making it up. All those negative thoughts enter my mind. And I was like, who can I call on that's not going to judge me? Then I just wanted to kill myself and had a plan and had the entire thing and had a suicidal ideation. Nobody's going to want that in their house. Not a church person. At least that's what I thought at the time. And so we made my way to the hospital. And in the hospital, during the ER, I text my pastor's wife. Felicia had encouraged me to text her. And they didn't really know me much. They were new to Calvary. I've been there for, I think, maybe 2 years, possibly. Maybe a year. I'm not even 100% sure. They were freshly new to Calvary Tabernacle. And I remember texting her, and I had talked to her a little bit about some problems and stuff like that. I'd sat down in Sister Carson's office once, but I hadn't really sat with Pastor, by myself, with Sister Carson, him and I. There was never that communication yet. And so I was like, what do you tell your pastor's wife? How does this how can you relate that to somebody? And so I remember texting her and telling her, just wanted to let you know I'm in the ER for suicide ideation. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm getting kicked out of the church. That's it. I'm getting kicked out. And she was like, we're praying for you now and stuff. And so I ended up staying I was admitted, and I stayed for 3 days, 2 nights and 3 days, which was the craziest thing to me. If you've never been in a psych ward, that is a whole ball game. But it was so ironic of like psych ward I was in. I love how God, no matter what it is, God always has his hand on you. There's 2 psych wards. There's a drug psych ward, at least in Indianapolis. There's a drug psych ward, and there's a suicide psych ward. And the suicide psych ward, which breaks my heart to this day, was full, completely full. And so I wasn't put in there, but I was put in the drug psych ward because they were open. And so I always think back on that, like I wasn't around the suicide spirit, which is what I was having that problem with. I wasn't around that spirit attached. And so I'm kind of thankful that I was in the drug psych ward kind of thing, the addiction one, which sounds really crazy to say, but if that spirit, that suicide spirit was in that room, I don't think that would have been good for me. And God knew that. God knew I needed to be over here, because that spirit of the drug addictions and stuff, I've never done drugs. And so it wasn't that kind of addiction. But what I took from being in that psych ward was very different, because there was somebody who said something, and again, I'm apostolic now. I look apostolic, and I come out of the room, I have a skirt, my hair is long, instantly they recognize, like you could see the shift in the room of the spirit, like recognize that there was somebody that shouldn't be there and stuff, and somebody that's different. There's some spirit attached. And so it was like the whole room shifted to me. Like I could feel the eyes on me and like the staring. And I didn't know at the time of what was going on, but somebody came up to me and asked, they said, well, you're a church person. You're apparently holy. You don't have a business being here. I thought all you people were perfect. And I thought, and I couldn't tell, I wish I could go back to that person. I wish I could find that person and tell them we're not perfect. We just have as much baggage as anybody else, but we have to learn to give it to God, because God will take it and like hold it for you and wipe your entire plate clean and stuff. And so that I took away, thinking, if I ever get through this, if I ever make it through this, I want people out there in the world to know we're not perfect. The church is a hospital and God is the healer and stuff. And so from that moment, like I will never forget being told that we're perfect. And so later on, like after I got out, I met with, my pastor and his wife, and which were absolutely lovely. I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to get kicked out. I know I'm done. Like, that's it. I'm getting kicked out of the church. Like, there is no ands if or buts about it. And the whole opposite happened. They were the most loving and kind people sitting in the room. I don't know how long we sat in his office with Sister Carson, Pastor Carson, and myself. But I remember all they cared about was that I was there, I was alive, and they prayed and they helped me. And they were like, you are not getting kicked out of our church. We love you. We care for you. All this wonderful and kind words. And I will never forget those moments. And from then on, they checked on me. Sister Carson would and stuff. And I had formed a support group through, this whole thing. And I had learned that people in the church are there, that you're not the only one to go through this, that it doesn't matter how dark you think your life is. God can take anything that is dark and ugly and turn it into a dance and make it so beautiful and so gracious that, because to God, it doesn't matter what your baggage is or anything like that. What matters is that you give it to Him. And I remember just the first time I finally gave it to God. And I had dealt with depression, anxiety, and all of that. I remember giving it to God and giving in and going to pray for somebody, because I don't pray, I pray for you, that sounds bad, but I pray for you. But I'm not someone who, let's go up to the front of the church and let me put my hand on yours and we're going to pray. No, I'd rather stick in the back and I'm going to wave my hand up here and let me pray for you from a distance, because that's what I do. I like to be back in the back. You don't need to hear me, see me, or anything. Which is ironic because I'm an interpreter for the deaf and we sit in the very front. It's great. But I went to go pray for somebody, and I remember like fighting, like, nope, not going to do this. Nope. Finally I did. And I remember going back to where I was and like just praying, like, God, I need you to heal me. Like, I need this, God, because I can't live like this anymore. Like, I couldn't breathe. It hurt to breathe. It, it was this whole like list of different things and stuff. And so, but I remember like God, like, and this is how I describe it because I don't know how else to describe it. So, it was almost like two hands had come down and picked up the baggage, picked up the anxiety and the depression. And like, I remember being able to like, I could breathe. I never felt that. Like, I never felt this like weight lift off of me. Like it was, I don't know. It was amazing. It was 100% like God, like lifting it off of me. And it was absolutely like just amazing. So I think one of the other struggles that I have had in my life is food. Like when my mom passed, food became comfort, emotional eating, and it became like, I have to eat. My mom cooked everything like homemade. So I didn't even know like Chef Boyardee existed until like my mom passed. I was like, what is this? Like we could actually have like an instant meal. Like we don't have to cook this whole 9 yards. I didn't know we weren't allowed to have ramen, any of that. Like, oh my goodness, my mom would have died like when I ate ramen for the first time. But so when mom passed, like McDonald's became my best friend because I didn't know how to cook. I was 16. I could cook you an egg and a quesadilla. Like that was about my extent of cooking. Now I could bake you a cake at the time, but I could not cook. So I like gained a bunch of weight. And like I've always been the big girl, even from a young age. That's always been something that I was always known for. Oh, you're big boned. It's okay. That Southern hospitality kind of like, bless your heart. They're being real nice and Southern, but they really mean you're just fat. And so, that's how I grew up. Like I was big boned. I was thunder thighs, all these words and stuff that go along with it. But then I became apostolic and like, I was like, oh, I want to get healthy. Like there's so many healthy people. And so I didn't at the time realize that it would lead me down a very dark path. And so I was like, I'm going to get healthy. I'm going to do this. And so I learned how to eat. I learned how to cook. I was excited. I counted calories, went to Weight Watchers and things like that. Like I had a lot of fun. But what ended up happening was, so I met Felicia in January 2020. But backwards in September of 2019, I was going to New York because I was going to be 30 at the end of October. And I had to make it to New York before I turned 30. And I was going to do it, but I had to be a certain size in my mind. And I realized that if I could decrease calories, that I could lose the weight quicker. I thought, okay, well, I'll do it just for a few months, get to my weight I want to be in New York and go to New York and come back and be fine. That didn't happen at all. It actually took me down further and stuff. And so I decreased my calories more. I was like, oh, I can get to my goal weight quicker. And then exercise became an addiction. And, I always thought addictions were just alcohol and drugs and coffee and things like that. Like, that's it. Like, it's food addiction. That's all. Drugs, that's it. You don't have addiction to anything else, like Facebook. Yeah, okay. None of y'all have that. But like, so exercise became an addiction. I would wake up and be at the gym when they opened at 4:30 in the morning. And I would work out from 4:30 to like 6:30, get a shower, go to work. Then after work, I'd come home and I'd go run. I'd run probably 10 miles a day, 5 to 10 miles. And I would just run. Because I was like, nope. And then if I was, if there was still sun or I still wanted to do something else besides run, I'd go bike for hours. And when I say hours, I mean hours. I would bike this trail up and down and through like Greenfield, Indiana and stuff, and just bike. And because I was not going to eat more than 1,000 calories. So I would end my calories at 1,000. And I was like, that's it. And if I ate any more, I had to work out double, but this was a 5-day-a-week thing. Gave my rest 2 days, but I always rode my bike. I always said, oh, that's not exercise. Riding your bike's not. It's enjoyable. No, it really was exercise. Like, I knew that. didn't want to say that, but I realized, on Saturdays I would go ride my bike. But it wasn't exercise, what I tell people. It's just, I'm just riding it for enjoyableness. And then I would meet Felicia a couple months after she had recognized that I had an eating disorder. And she is not trained in eating disorders. And so, but I will never forget the day that I realized I had a food problem. That's what I would call it. I called it a food problem. I was not having an eating disorder. That was not my bill. I was not what I was. I had depression, anxiety, I didn't need anything else in my life. Like, who needs another like mental health problem on top of like depression, anxiety, But so she took me, we were in therapy, and she was like, let's go get a milkshake from Chick-fil-A. And I was like, no, because I had already hit my 1,000 calories. Like, I had dinner planned, because I tracked everything. When I say I tracked everything from breakfast to dinner and any snack in between and any piece of gum I ate. I tracked it. I knew what I was eating the whole day. I ate ice to compensate the hunger, to separate the hunger. And so, but she was going to take me. And so we went, and I remember driving down, like having a panic attack, like in the car, like, anxiety attack, like in the car. And like, you can't do this. You can't take me there. Like, you can't. Like, I was trying so hard to get out. Like, I was sweating. And we don't sweat, women. We don't do that. We glisten. But I was sweating, okay? I was not glistening. I was like sweating. And we got 2 Chick-fil-A, and I'm like shaking at this time, like I'm about to have a milkshake. And milkshake was one of the foods that I had given up. I was not ever going to touch, because nope, that was way too many calories. I can tell you how many calories, sugar, all of that. And I was like, nope. And so she ordered me a small, handed it to me, and I'm like shaking, like it's in my hand, like the cup has got water on it. I'm just shaking, like I'm shocked the cherry didn't like fly off and hit her in the face, because I'm just like over here. And it's a milkshake, for Pete's sake, it's a milkshake. Like, who's scared of a milkshake? Me. But like she was like, you have to take a sip. Take a sip of milkshake. It's fine. You don't have a food problem. You remember, you're fine. Finally took a sip, and my like not endorphins, my adrenaline like rushed. And we finally got back to my car. I said goodbye and got in my car and like sped off. Luckily, I didn't get a ticket, because I was like going about 90 miles per hour. But I was so like panicked and so like, oh my goodness, I can't, because I couldn't work out, because I had a conference to go to at Calvary. I think it was Mark conference at the time. Like, so like, I was like, I have a conference. Like, I can't go work out. I have to go to church. And like, how am I gonna plan? I couldn't figure it out. I don't even know what happened at church. Like, one of my close friends, Megan, was sitting with me, and she's like, are you okay? I was like, I'm fine. Like, I was like a drug addict almost, because I was just over here like shaking so bad, all because of a milkshake. And so from that point, I was like, I think I might have a food problem. And so then about a year and a half later, I would actually be professionally diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. Restrictive anorexia nervosa. I'll get the whole name right. Pretty much just anorexia. It was restrictive anorexia is what I was. And so that right there just kind of helped lead into what I had. So with even being diagnosed professionally, I still was like, no, I don't have an eating disorder. I don't. I'm fine. I can eat. I eat, but I ate in front of people. And so like, because I knew who to eat in front of, like work people, church people, like go home, I don't have to eat. I don't have to eat in front of anybody. Who's going to watch me eat? And so the day that I realized that I had a real problem was I play in the orchestra at Calvary. And I was sitting there playing, and we usually don't stay on the platform the whole time. We usually just open, when we play. We don't always, join the choir and play a song with the choir. And so, but that Sunday we were. And I remember sitting on the platform. I was fine during the beginning of service, worshiping, all of this. And we sat down, and then they had some announcements. And then all of a sudden, while I was sitting, I got real hot, real sweaty. And I was like, I'm going to pass out. I'm going to pass out on the platform. Like, now I'm not If you know me, I'm not an attention person. Like, so I did not want to be that one person that passed down the platform, like that all of the world is going to see or anything like that. And the whole congregation, because if you've been to Calvary, it's not small, it's big. So the whole congregation is going to be able to see me like totally pass out. So I'm over shaking, didn't know how to exit, you know, and I was like, okay, if I could just stay until the end of the song, stay until the end of the song. That's all I could tell myself. And as soon as we were done, I was going to be able to exit without making it look very suspicious. And I remember just like, I couldn't play. I just held the instrument in my mouth. So I looked like I was playing, and like eyes were darkening, and like I was going back and forth, and finally got done. And I went into the bathroom so I could just sit and like tuck my head and like let this try to go through. And I realized I hadn't ate in like 4 days. And I was like, maybe I have a problem. And it was an amazing like service, like a blowout, Holy Ghost packed service. And I was like, I'm done. I'm going to the altar. Like, I've got to tell somebody I need help, you know? And I remember from that point on, like, I have an eating disorder. What do I do? How do I get out of this? How do I like function? Like, food became an enemy, but it also became like my checker. Like, I had to constantly, and I still can tell you the calories in almost 90% of everything that I ate. And it's so, people found it funny because they could just holler something and I could be like, oh yeah, that's got like 120 calories, you know, just something I could do because I counted every single every calorie mounted. I wouldn't drink drinks that had calories because I didn't want to waste the calorie on drink. I wanted the food. And so, but then I remember like I needed help. And so my therapist, Felicia, again, is not specially trained. It's a specialist is what you have to go through a therapist that specializes in eating disorders, which unfortunately in the Christian faith is very hard to find a Christian, let alone an apostolic eating disorder therapist. Yes, there's wonderful Christian and absolutely wonderful apostolic therapists, but unfortunately eating disorders are not only taboo in the Apostolic church, but in any church and in the world, eating disorders are very taboo. And they're just very hard to find any help for. And when you do, you are stopped because you either have to go to a residential or it's crowded and you have to be put on a waiting list to get help, unfortunately, which is sad because there's so many of us that struggle, you know, not just in the world, but in the apostolic faith. Mine really started as a teenager, even before my mom, being bullied, being picked on. You know, I think I was called every name under the sun that dealt with being big. I was always the biggest in the class. And so that whole perspective weighed in on my eating disorder. But what I really saw was, you know, okay, I can do this. I can move forward if I could just say I have an eating disorder. I had gone through suicide and depression and anxiety, and when I gone through all of that, my eating disorder really showed that it was a mask. So what I've learned, so I now see an eating disorder therapist. She specializes in, praise the Lord, she is a Christian, and she specializes in, and what I have learned is that an eating disorder can hide very easily in the mental health world. And she said, you will see a lot of your eating disorder people before they ever recognize they have that they'll go through suicide or depression, anxiety, and self-harming behavior, which I had everything, including self-harming. You know, I hated my body. And so like when my emotions would become too much, I would cut myself, you know, I would harm myself so that the emotion would release. And where I would harm myself was my stomach, because I hated it. I hated my stomach. And so what I learned was that was like a mask, like the eating disorder was like underneath all of this other stuff because it could hide, because you don't have one, especially in the apostolic world. That's a problem. We don't talk about eating disorders. You know, we just brush it aside. So it's easier to hide. And so when I found the problem and I was able to get accountability partners and able to tell God, hey, I need your help with food now, God. I need to be able to eat, because this is God's temple. Like, we have to take care of our body, and I wasn't. And so I am starting recovery for eating disorders, and how I've kind of made it through that is I have dug into the Bible looking for scriptures that deal with beauty, that deal with, my favorite is Song of Solomon, you were wonderfully and beautifully made, that I hung on to those. And God really, when I was praying one day, God was like, you need to write down all of them on a mirror, because I hate mirrors. And I'm better now, like even sitting in front of like this camera, I'm like, ugh, people are gonna look at me. Like I hate mirrors. Like, and I have a mirror now, and I can look at myself now and stuff like that. And so on my mirror, new people, when they come into my apartment, laugh at my mirror at first until they hear the story. But so God asked me, you need to write them down. He told me, write down everything I say you are, because He created me, and He compelled me. He was like, I don't make ugly things. Everything is the way I created it to be. And God, not me, but God created it to be. And so on my mirror, when you walk in to my bathroom, I have one of those long mirrors that stand on the door, and it has scriptures all around the edge. And it's, God, you're beautifully, wonderfully made. God loves you the way you are. There is no flaw in you, and things like that, and other things that God has told me. And when I feel the negative thoughts of, oh, you're getting a little pudgy again, because with eating disorders, you will have to gain some of that weight back, because you were an unhealthy weight. So you have to gain some of it, and I have. And so when I get like, oh no, okay, I'm fat again, because that's a fear of mine, is to be that double X again, and where I had gone from a double X to an extra small wouldn't even fit me. They were hanging off of me and stuff, and now I'm back to small, which I'm in a healthy weight. And so I have all this stuff, and I would go and I would just read every single thing, just read every single one. And if it didn't work at the end and I still was like negative, I'd go back through and I would read and read and read until, okay, I can move on. And that has helped me kind of get into the start of recovery, and then also transitioning into seeing a eating disorder specialist has really helped me walk through. And just because I see, therapists doesn't mean that God isn't working in me, and God is able to bring someone in that can give me tools that I don't know about, tools that I need in order to move forward and things like that. And so, God is definitely still working on me with the eating disorder, but you're not alone. There's other people out there that have them, that have an eating disorder. They're real, and they're very much in the Apostolic Church as well. So through all of this, there was like an instant where I had met somebody. It was at General Conference, 2021, I think, or 2022. 2021, because I had my suicide in June, and so October area was General Conference. And Cassie was actually at General Conference. She had come with our mutual friend that we have, and like the mutual friend really wanted us to meet. And I was like, I was not at the time where I was still like great in my like walk after my suicide, but I was like, I don't know, I battled with going, battled with not going. And I finally decided, okay, I'll go. I was like, but I have to sit with you. I have to sit with somebody I know and stuff. And so I ended up meeting Cassie at General Conference. And we really didn't talk. We really didn't, because I was a nervous wreck. I don't do crowds. There was other people there. And I was just like, I was done. I was so overwhelmed. And so I don't think I really wanted to talk to anybody. I think as soon as church service was over, I was out the door. It was good, but I was like, bye. And so I reached out to Cassie after General Conference. I was kind of encouraged to reach out to her. And I was like, hey, you want to meet? And she was living in Jasper, and I didn't know who she was. I didn't know where Jasper, Indiana was. And I was, do you want to meet? And so we ended up meeting a couple weeks later. Again, we didn't know each other whatsoever. This was a God thing. Because I'm not someone who, I'm an adventurous person, but I'm also a cautious adventurous person. I just don't meet random strangers alone. I don't recommend that. But I went down to Jasper, drove, met her. We had lunch and we hung out all day. And we ended up clicking I was like, okay, I think I could be friends with this person. And we met again, and we hit it off really well. And she ended up moving I don't know when, but she moved up to Indianapolis a few months later and ended up at Calvary. And we kind of became friends from there. And we both realized that we had a same thing, a same common denominator. I can't say the word apparently, but we had the same kind of problem, I guess is what I'll say. She had an eating disorder and I had an eating disorder. And that was the first other apostolic person that I was like, you have one? Like, oh my goodness, like there's other apostolics who have eating disorders. And we actually, ironically, have the same diagnosis, eating disorder, which is very interesting in the first place. We run it very differently, how we handled our eating disorders, but we're diagnosed the same. And we both had a lot of pain and things like that in our lives. And so in prayer, I had been in prayer about like, I really wanted to help other youth. Youth is the group that I really just have a passion for right now. And which is totally a new ball game because I was never a youth person. I was always a kid, like I was always in the kids ministry. And now I have like this passion for like helping youth and letting them know, hey, you're not alone. Like I know what it was like to be a youth and have nobody and have pain and suffering and things like that. And so like I felt led to lead a Facebook group for women in general, just women. And I kind of approached Cassie, and because I'm not a licensed therapist where she is, and I was like, well, that'd be really nice to have like a licensed therapist. And so I told her, I said, we should just pray about it and see, you know, what will God do? What does God want us to do? Does he want us to do this or not? And so we ended up really both felt led to create a Facebook group. And we lead the Proverbs 31 Women Facebook group. And this one's for women. It's for any woman who feels that their body, they have body shame, body dysmorphia, body image issues, eating disorder, disordered eating, any of those kind of things where you feel like you're alone in that and you're not, you know. And so we got together and we created this Facebook page to let other women know our stories and to let them know, hey, you're not the only one sitting in that pew that hasn't eaten in 3 days. I've been there. I've done that. Who still struggles with eating, because there's days that I just forget to eat and I'm like, oh, I probably should eat. Or days that I just feel so bloated and so fat that I still like, I'm not going to eat, and I'll push the plate away and have to force myself to eat. And so like that's where this whole came from. And then so that's been running for almost a year. Next week will actually be a year that Facebook group has been established. And then about half a year ago, me and Cassie like had randomly both kind of came up in the conversation of a podcast. And like I had really felt in prayer that it needs to be more. It doesn't need to just be for women. Women aren't the only ones that are struggling. There's men. And I cannot relate to a man whatsoever. And I was like, God, I'm a woman. Like I can relate to women. I'm not married. I don't have a brother. I didn't grow up with a brother. Like wrong person, God. Nope. Don't tell God no, by the way. But so like me and Cassie had a conversation one day. We ended up both going, hey, we should start a podcast. And I was like, okay, God, great. No, I don't want to start a podcast. Like I don't even, no, I can talk a lot, obviously, but like I didn't want to like talk about my problems on a platform that is way more out there to the world than Facebook kind of is, because our group is private. It's just us. It's just the little group that knows about us. This could go to anybody in the world. And I was like, I don't know about that, God. Well, we ended up starting a podcast, and from this podcast is not just for women. It is for anybody whatsoever that is struggling, because you're not alone. Men have eating disorders as much as women. Women have much as suicide ideation and suicide problems as men. Mental health there isn't a gender for any of them. It doesn't matter female, male. mental health doesn't care who you are. And so neither does God. God loves all of us together. And he uses things to reach those who think, no, the church is perfect, when we're not. And that's what the platform of the podcast is to talk about these taboo topics, suicide, self-harm, eating disorders, things like that, so that, hey, there is people in the church who, one, has grown up in the church, one is first generation, that have sat through tons of baggage while in the church, tons of baggage before ever coming into the church, and then ended up with a suicide ideation while sitting in the church. It's happened, and it can. And so it doesn't matter. And so these platforms are there so that we can tell our stories, and so we unmask the enemy, because the enemy stays masked when we hide those problems, and the enemy will win if we hide them. We keep them in a box. Remember my box from before? The enemy stole my box and held my box and was like, this is mine because you hid me. I can hold the box and the power over you. But if we can just talk about it and give them to God and let the world know we have these issues, but we have a bigger God that is bigger than them, and that the enemy can't win if we're not isolated. And so it's so like ironic that it all came about, and like how me and Cassie met, because even though we have two different stories and we're very different in different things, we work really well together. It is just so that you guys know, hey, you're not alone. So this question has been a little bit difficult for me, because like, how do you pick? Like, there's so many great women in your life, but I finally narrowed it down to two women. And the first would have to be my first therapist, Felicia Miller. When I came to her, she had to sit and deal with me. I'm paying for therapy, and I would sit and not talk to her. Like, you're going to therapy to talk to somebody? Yeah, no, not me. I just went to therapy to pay her to stare at her, apparently. But she never gave up on me. She patiently walked me through therapy. And I think the reason she would be like that perfect influence is because the baggage that you have doesn't scare her. Nothing scares her in that. For her, it's like you come in with your problems and she just wants to help you. She wants you to get the tools so you can succeed in life and graduate from her office, kind of to say. She doesn't want to see you burdened and baggage down, but she doesn't like force you into things. But my biggest thing like with her was when I was admitted. She's a therapist. She didn't have to do what she did that day. She took me to the hospital. She followed me over to the hospital, and I expected her to kind of just come in, make sure I get into the ER, because I'm a stubborn person. Because I was like, if she leaves, I'm out the door. Like, I'm not staying. But she decided to stay. And I wasn't just sitting in the ER for like a few hours. No. We arrived, I think, at like 8 o'clock. And I did not get admitted into the hospital until probably about 1:30 in the morning. And she sat with me the entire time. Never left. Now she has kids. She has a husband. This is a job. This is her just job. But instead of leaving me, she stayed. And that's kind of what I strive to be, is to be that person where it doesn't matter. Someone's in a crisis mode, I'm going to help them. Let me give them the tools that were given to me so that I can pass them down, so that you don't kill yourself or you don't harm yourself. So that kind of strive to just help people is something that I like just have picked up from her and things like that. And so my second person would have to be my pastor's wife, Sister Rachel Carson. Oh my goodness. So she is just a godly, wonderful woman. But she is the kindest person you will ever meet. When after my suicidal ideation, I was so scared to death that that's it. She's going to hate me. Like, oh my goodness. And I was so wrong. All she had was the love of God through her. You could just see the love all over her face that I do. Like, I appreciate you and things like that. And her just being that kind and wonderful pastor's wife and checking on me throughout the time. And, you know, sometimes she'll randomly text me. I haven't heard from her, and, you know, for a couple of weeks, you know, she's a pastor's wife. But she'll randomly text, hey, I'm thinking about you, praying for you. Just those kind of things where you know she's listening to God. Because anytime she texts me that I'm like struggling with something and she doesn't know, you know, and it's that kind of moment where she's in tune so much with God, but she loves all of the saints in the church and just has that love for her congregation and her family. The next generation, what would I tell the next generation? You guys have so much more struggles than I think any other generation, and we all have our own struggles in our generation. So the older saints in the room, it's okay. Like, they do have their struggles because they have a lot more technology and their hands are more involved in that technology than I think any of us ever, because like even they go to school. But the advice I think I would give them is, one, don't let the communication with your friends at church lapse. And if you're hurting, reach out. It's okay to hurt. It's okay. Like, if you lose somebody in your life, it's okay to grieve. Don't let an adult tell you not to grieve. Don't allow them to suppress your emotions. Take it from somebody who did it for 16 years. From losing my mom to being 33, I suppressed my emotions, and it ruined my entire young adult life. I didn't have fun. I did, but I didn't. I was such a stick in the mud. Don't suppress. It's okay to hurt. Your emotions are valid. God gave us these emotions to be valid. So not only go to the altar, get prayed for when you're feeling depression, when you're feeling that anxiety, and if you're a self-harmer or you have an eating disorder, go to the altar and pray, but seek professional help. Go to your pastor. If you're not comfortable with your pastor telling him, go to your pastor's wife. Go to the youth pastor or the youth pastor's wife. Tell them, I'm struggling, and I can guarantee you that they're not going to push you away, and they're not going to tell you you can't feel that. They're going to pray for you, and they're going to find you help so that you can survive into adulthood. Because you've got this, and we got this because God has us wrapped in his hands. God has not left you. God has not forsaken you, and you are not alone. So don't forget, it's okay to ask for help.